Welcome to the Cinema Psycho Show, the madhouse for film freaks and film fans of all types. I'm your host, Brian Coddington, joined my fellow co-host and filmmaker, John Woolscroft.
Just when I think I'm out of this podcast, they pull me back in.
Oh, yeah. A lot of this movie is just when Francis Ford Coppola thinks he's out, they pull him back in.
See, I should have done it like Pacino. When
I
I'm
don't
out,
think Coppola sounds like Pacino.
no, that's what I should have done the voice like.
Why did you go Southern there a little bit? You had a little bit of
okay, Pacino as a Southern Danny. See, I'm just a small town lawyer. Your big city ways frighten me. There you go.
Yeah. There you go. Good enough. Good enough.
Yeah.
Well, this week on the episode, this week on the podcast. Jesus Christ, this is what happens when we go live here. I fuck up all my things. This week we are talking about a movie that gets a lot of hate, and I really think it's undeserved hate, especially when you consider that there are many movies out there that are about 1,000 times worse than this one. And that is, of course, 1990's Godfather Part Trace, or Part 3.
And yeah, we're talking about both the original and the Coda version because they're the same movie. Francis.
Nice try there, Francis.
It's
the same movie. You cut it up a little bit and you moved it around and you just said, like, here, there's the movie. That's what you did. It's cool. I get you did that. But yeah, we for our video audience, we are recording this live in, I don't know what you call it, Psycho's Vision or Cinema Vision or what the fuck. John, you're a wordsmith.
Color.
There you go. We're trying to do this live on the YouTubes. It might be something we do all the time. It might not be. This might be the last time we do it. But either way, we're live right now. So this movie, I'll be the first to tell you this, John. I did not hate this movie as much as other people hate this, even when it first came out. What about you?
To give a little bit of background for myself, and I'm sure people, you saw the thumbnail. This is our continuing Really That Awful ? Where we give movies that get a little bit derided a second chance. And for me, when I saw Godfather 3, I saw it too young. My parents rented it, and I was just kind of in the same room, and I was like maybe like 6 or 7. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I think I was probably playing with action figures, and I kind of got a sense that my dad didn't overly like it, or didn't think it was as good. My mom just didn't really care for it at all. But it was years later until I saw it, like old enough to appreciate it. And I loved the first two and did not overly care for this one. But I wondered, and we'll get into it in this episode, did I unfairly compare it to what had come before? And so I thought, well, it's been, I'd say 15 years since the last time I saw it. So it was like time to give it another go around.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I know for me, I was not really into The Godfather growing up at all. Like it was not my thing. It was something that was like, oh yeah, this is a good movie and you should definitely like it. But it was never a thing where I'm like, yes, this is a movie I want to sit down and watch on a Saturday night. It wasn't until I kind of got into film and really explored, the medium and got introduced to it by, either film professors or just people who were like, hey, you should really check out The Godfather, and actually took the time to sit down and watch part 1 and 2, that I was like, oh my God, I see the point now. I see why it's considered one of the 2 greatest films of all time. And then you watch part 3. And part 3, I saw it the first time and I'm like, it's not terrible. It's not. And that's the thing, is I'm like, it's continuing the same thing that you've seen in the past 2 movies. It's just now set in contemporary times and
ish. Yeah, it's like 1979.
And it's just, it's almost like And when you find out the behind the scenes of this movie, it's almost like someone didn't want to make this, but had to.
Yeah, and I
And
got
that leads to the background of this. But I'll tell you this, like, I actually enjoy watching The Godfather Part 3 for the bizarre shit that's in it. And some of the weirdo characters in it, like Don Altobello and Joey Zaza, and of course, who can forget Vincent.
Oh, so there's a lot to unpack there from what
Yeah.
from
Well,
everything you said.
do you want to dive into the background of this movie, like how this movie got made?
Yeah, I was
'Cause
just
it's interesting.
thinking, I have a couple of notes. I'm sure you do too. Like, but I think it's interesting that like we always make the joke before we get into history of like, oh, they really Jedi'd it. But Jedi is not as derided as this film was, and I think that there is something to be said about in terms of having trilogies where the third one's the weakest. Is there was only 3 years in between every Star Wars movie, so it seemed like kind of more organic where you had 2 years between the first 2 Godfather films and then what was it 16 years until the third film. It just seemed like the third one kind of came out of nowhere after it seemed like it was all over. But
Yeah, it kind of reminded me nowadays of when they do these legacy sequels, or they do
mhm.
these really big like continuations where they come in decades after the fact. Like they did it with Tron Legacy. They did it with Beetlejuice just last year, where
Gremlins
they'll
3's coming out. Well,
yeah,
they're working on it.
so it's almost like they pick up, a franchise that's been long dormant and say, hey, yeah, let's try to go ahead and make a sequel to it. And honestly, nowadays it's done, I think, for quote unquote nefarious reasons, meaning that, hey, they want to milk all the money they can out of nostalgia. I don't think with The Godfather Part 3 that was the case, because when you look at the history, this movie had been in development literally since the ending of Part 2. Like it never stopped. There just was a very big difference in the fact that for that time, Francis Ford Coppola and to some extent Mario Puzo were not necessarily attached to it.
Yeah, because initially, as a background, Coppola refused to come back for part 3, but it wasn't until he was in pretty bad financial situation after his 1982 film One from the Heart.
And Cotton Club. Don't forget Cotton
And
Club.
Cotton Club, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely screwed the pooch
Yep.
that he realized, well, better go back to the well that made me.
Well, what's interesting is that in those years, as I mentioned, Paramount had tried multiple times to get something off the ground. Like at one point, they had Michael Eisner, yes, of Disney fame.
Oh.
He pitched a treatment of a story in which the CIA, and this is a real story, okay? The CIA would actually work together with the Corleone family to assassinate a dictator in Costa Rica. That's a real story.
Okay, sure.
That's
That's
a
movie.
thing. That's a movie. But even with that, you had Mario Puzo, who did a very like rushed treatment that was supposed to be about Anthony kind of taking over the family, but also doing things with going to Costa Rica to assassinate a dictator. So there was a lot of weird shit in the time period between, when Godfather Part 2 ended and when Francis Ford Coppola claimed bankruptcy and needed cash. Because that's really what this movie is. It's Francis needs cash to stay afloat.
And as he did state that he thought the first 2 films did complete the Corleone saga, which I could see that, but I did find it interesting to see like what would happen towards Michael's life when he got to be, roughly ish the age of his father from the first film, where it's like history repeating itself when, what kind of man is old Michael compared to, Vito was in the beginning of the first film.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting concept, and that's why I say like if from a conceptual standpoint, Godfather Part 3 is not a bad idea. I think where it fails is in its execution. But even in its failure, and this is the funny thing, even in its failure, this is Coppola still at his prime. Like, I think we can still assess that, you know, after he did this movie, he ended up doing Bram Stoker's Dracula. Okay.
Which is a mixed bag itself.
This isn't Megalopolis Coppola. Okay. Let's be honest here. I'm sorry. Godfather Part 3, you can look up both movies. They're not made by the same person in the same time period. And like even watching that, I'm like, there's no way in hell that Coppola there's no way in hell that the same Coppola that made Megalopolis is also the same person who made Part 3, Dracula, and then, I don't know, Godfather Part 1 and 2. So like, even at his worst at this part of time, it's still pretty damn good. That's all I'm trying to get across.
Shortly after Dracula, he did make Jack with Robin Williams.
We don't have to talk about that, John. We don't have to talk about that. He needed money. Okay.
Seems like that happens to him a lot.
He needed money until his wine empire got up and running. And then it was, now I've got all the money I need. I don't need money from anyone anymore. I'll make my own weirdo fucking movie.
You're not going to make my batshit movie about New York, Rome.
New York, Rome. Check out our back catalog. Our episode on Megalopolis is really good.
That would have been great in Godfather 3 if it had been like, what do you think of my boner? You know. Go back to the club.
You know. Go back to the club. Oh shit. Well, what's interesting is that along with Coppola joining kind of the production in the late 80s, Talia Shire actually was one who convinced him to do it. And there were even rumors that at the one time Nicolas Cage was going to be playing the role of Vincent, which I would probably die laughing if that happened.
Nepotism. Yeah.
Well, let's be honest here. Let's get this out of the way. Okay, this is important to bring up. So important. I'm going to go to solo shot. Hollywood is filled with nepotism. Okay, this movie is not alone in that. The entire industry, since the beginning of Hollywood, has been filled with nepotism. It's just in the DNA. I mean, last week we talked about Mulholland Drive. And we talked about Blue Velvet. You know, Laura Dern is a child of nepotism. Yeah. It's nothing against her, but it's the industry. And I don't see it as large of a problem because there are other industries out there where it's like, oh, we're going to go into the family business. Like, think about how many times you've seen steel workers or coal miners who are like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to get a job at the steel mill or the coal or mining coal because my mom or my dad or whoever down the line did it. And they put in a good word for me. So I think there's nepotism in all industries. It's just on display in Hollywood.
My great grandfather started this plumbing business, so that's why I'm in the plumbing business.
Yes.
Kind of yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And people take it as a knock, like anybody saying that, like, oh, you know, they're saying I'm not talented. No, it's not that. It's saying if you weren't talented, you wouldn't still be in the business. It's that you had a leg in the door that other people didn't because of a family member.
And I understand that, but I also look at it in sense of it's been that way since forever. You know what I mean?
Like, all walks of life. Yeah.
It's always been like that. It's always, and I just, whenever you're working in the entertainment industry, it's always who you know. So it's like, is it because of the fact that they were related to somebody that's working in it? Probably that was part of it. But let's be honest here. That does kind of blow up in the movie's face with Sofia Coppola.
Wasn't his fault.
It was not. I don't think it was her fault. It was her dad's fault. But yeah, I mean, large amount of the original cast came back for this, except for one really important one.
Oh, who's that, Brian?
Oh, Robert Duvall. Because he wanted as much money. I think he wanted like just a bump in pay that was comparable to what Al Pacino was getting. Because apparently the original script for Part 3 was going to involve a larger role for Robert Duvall's character, Tom Hagen, in which he actually would be an informant. And there would be kind of a clashing between Michael and Tom, which honestly, if you think about that, that's a much more interesting movie than what we got,
Yeah.
and would actually play really well with like his role from part 1 to 2, because he kind of, is always shit on by the Corleone family. Not gonna, no one likes to say that, like, he really is shit on. He's the one non-Italian, okay?
That Irish potato eater.
Yeah. He's the one adopted son. He's always thought of as like, well, you're the consigliere, and then now you're not the consigliere. You're now the attorney. Oh, you're out, Tom. Oh yeah, you're gonna be only doing this part of the business. And it's like, oh, well, it's because I trust you. It's like, no. It would be interesting to see him be like, you know what, I'm tired of this shit. I can also see people saying like that feels too much like part 2
A little too close to
and a little too close to
Alfredo.
Fredo.
Yeah.
Fredo. But I think it would be interesting because, this is Robert Duvall, you know, in his prime too, It'd be fun to see those two actors.
Yeah, I would like to see an alternate universe where he's in this movie. If nothing else, I mean, I would want to see it because he's a good actor and I like the character, but I would also just like to see how radically different this movie would have been if he had been in it. Because I think it would have been a completely different movie.
Well, it would have been more personal. And I think that's one of the problems with part 3 is just on the surface, it's a very plot driven movie, right? Like it's very much this thing going on over here with Immobiliari is happening here. And then, oh yeah, there's the Vatican Bank. And then, oh yeah, there's the whole thing with this person, it's not so much rooted in what I think really made The Godfather Part 2 especially really well. I'm not talking so much about part 1. I'm talking about part 2, is the whole idea of family dynamics being the main focal point. And it's how does this character navigate balancing all of those family dynamics while also being a cold-blooded killer.
Yeah. Well, I think a large problem with the family dynamics in this film is that Diane Keaton, as Kate, she's kind of sidelined because of, well, really the events of Godfather 2, where, they find ways for her to be in the plot, but she's not, you know, in love with well, she says later on that she never stopped loving him, but she's divorced from Michael, shall we say. So she doesn't have, there's not the drama there. His son doesn't have much to do because he wants to go be an opera singer. And as we said, Sofia Coppola playing his devoted daughter, the performance really just isn't there. So even though I think she gets unfairly shit on, but yeah, the family dynamic isn't there because we don't have like actors like James Caan and Robert Duvall that we had in the first film. But one thing I have to wonder, I have to ask you, Brian, if they had Bridget Fonda sitting there for such a small role, why not just recast the Bridget Fonda role and have Bridget Fonda have her dye her hair black and play the Winona, what should have been the Winona Ryder character, who ended up being played by Sofia.
Yeah, I mean that would have made more sense. I mean, I was doing research and apparently Madonna was offered that role originally.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm almost thinking it's the same reason why like Keanu Reeves was offered the role of Jonathan Harker. Like if we put this person in, we'll get a lot of eyeballs to the screen.
Yeah.
But she wanted way too much money. Like that was she was like, she wanted way too much money. But and I imagine probably the fact that it was a very small part probably also was a part of it too. Keep in mind, this is around the same time that she was making Dick Tracy and
give me that Tracy money.
She wants that Tracy money. But no, I think it would have been interesting. I thought that too. I'm like, Bridget Fonda, of all the people, she's in this kind of very minor role as a blinking and miss it. And you're like, oh, she's a reporter who ends up having a one night stand with Vincent. And that's it. Like, that's all we get. But I also imagine that this is before she kind of had her peaking career with movies like, what the hell is it? The one where her like creepy roommate like dyes her hair to look just like her.
Single white female.
Great movie. as well as wasn't she in La Femme Nikita too?
I believe so. Yeah.
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 So like that, those were like early '90s movies that really hit hard. So I imagine that they probably were like, well, we don't. She's not at this time the star that we want kind of helming this picture. And keep in mind, like Winona Ryder, who was originally cast to be the Mary Corleone, she was hot off of Heathers and like a string of hits.
Beetlejuice. Being one
Well,
of them.
yeah, Beetlejuice as well. So like she was already primed for a leading role and had to drop out because of and I'm pulling from Wikipedia, nervous exhaustion. I call that just like the stress and anxiety of doing all of this stuff for the past like 5 years got to her. And I understand that.
I'm not alleging anything. But
Allegedly.
nervous exhaustion can also allegedly mean drug addiction and rehab.
I don't have anything to say about that, so I don't know.
Right.
But
yeah,
I'm saying,
I have nothing other than just that's usually a term used.
All I'm going with is what Wikipedia said. Okay, take it or leave it. But here's the thing, and this is important to note here, and this is something that I find hilarious. It's funny how in Hollywood certain things like connect to one another. So because Winona Ryder dropped out of Godfather Part III, she felt terrible about it, and a year or so later brought Francis the script for Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Ta-da.
So, and Francis did the movie because of the failure of Godfather Part III, because American Zoetrope was about to go under. So Winona Ryder literally saved American Zoetrope and basically saved Francis' career for at least a little while with Bram Stoker's Dracula, all because she dropped out of Godfather Part III.
I wouldn't even call it bad luck, but I would say if American Zoetrope didn't have strange luck, they wouldn't have any luck at all.
Sometimes that's how it works. That's sometimes how it works. So, but funny little thing. Now, the behind the scenes shit doesn't stop there, because apparently the making of this movie was so bizarre. Like there was, and I kid you not when I tell you this, there was a rebellion on set because of Al Pacino's hair.
Okay.
Did you hear about this, John?
No, but I'm sorry, laughing because that's hilarious.
Okay.
Like, I will admit his hair's a bit distracting, but a rebellion?
Yes. There was a rebellion on set because of the fact that Francis decided he wanted to go with this militant looking hairstyle thing, right? Like he wanted to go with that. That was counter to, the hairstyles that Pacino had all through Part 1 and 2, right? That because of that, the people involved who had been with Francis like for a long time, who've been involved with Part 1 and 2, they were like in open rebellion over it. Al Pacino hated it. This actually led, I kid you not, to Dick Smith, the godfather of special effects makeup, more or less, who had, made Marlon Brando up and also worked in the makeup for both Part 1 and Part 2. He quit over the hair.
Wow.
Because he was like, this is bullshit. And actually ruined their relationship. They never worked again.
God, it sounds almost like making a mountain out of a molehill. This sounds like Bill Murray with Harold Ramis in Groundhog's Day.
Yeah.
Like maybe you could just forget about the hair for a second. Like,
well, you know what I was thinking, like, why would this be a thing that people who aren't necessarily the quote unquote director of the film, why would they care? And I think part of it is because Francis brought in people who had so much passion and had built their careers around the first two Godfathers. And they all kind of had their ideas of how everything was supposed to go, right? And it's like you're getting the band back together, but it's been like 15 years since you've played. And maybe that music meant something different for each individual person in the band. So like it might seem innocuous that, oh yes, Al Pacino's hairstyle led to an open rebellion on the set, right? and led to Dick Smith quitting. But when you realize, you're like, oh, wait a minute, these people have a strong emotional connection to this material that Francis also shares, but they're kind of not realizing, like, oh yeah, Francis is the director. You know, if he has a vision of this going someplace else that maybe runs counter, then maybe you kind of have to like say, okay, fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it could seem something small to you and I, but it could have been just one of many things that a lot of people were afraid of what it might do to the legacy of it. You know, this could have been one of 100 things that we don't know about. That could have just been the one thing that set the bomb off, but it wasn't the thing that lit the fuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And that's what I thought about. I'm like, okay, well, this is something a lot deeper. So do we want to dive a little bit into the plot here? There's a lot of plot.
Oh boy. Okay. So before we do, I want to say we kind of sometimes we can break these down into encapsulations of like, okay, we agree with this, or maybe this is why it wasn't liked, kind of thing. But sometimes it kind of happens more organically. And so if we're going to talk about the plot, Brian, I feel that we have to bring up first and foremost that one of the issues that a lot of people have with this movie is that the plot is incredibly convoluted.
Yes. Before we got rolling, and I thought about this after I'd seen it last night, because I watched it last night before in preparation for the show. So I thought about, I'm like, what's so familiar about this movie? And I realized that The Godfather Part III is Beetlejuice. Not in the sense that I think Beetlejuice is bad. I don't. I enjoyed it. I loved it. But one of the things that John, you and I both thought about was that there is a lot of plot, a ton of things that happen in this one movie. And that's shared with both Beetlejuice and The Godfather Part 3. It's almost like someone was like, hey, let's just jam pack a movie burrito with characters and plot and see what happens.
And I would even go so far as to say what the film opens up with. So what you think is going to be the narrative focus of this film, the involvement with the Catholic Church and the Bank of the Vatican is going to be the central focus of this plot. But I dare say, when just comparing it to Beetlejuice in the sense of just in one way, that you could drop Willem Dafoe and Burton Squeeze in that movie, and it's you don't lose anything. Like if you dropped the whole Catholic Church thing and just had somewhere other way that Michael wanted to go straight, then you don't lose anything. It almost just seems like after the whole new pope decides, we don't want to work with you guys anymore, it's just kind of dropped. It's like, what happened with that plot line?
Well, I mean, I understand why the plot line's there, from the sense that, like dominoes, you have to have one part happen to get to the next part, right? Like Michael's ultimate goal, right? His ultimate goal through his first and second movies are that he wants the family to be legitimate. He doesn't want to be a mafia boss. He is not someone who's ever really wanted that. It's always been a means to an end, right? Even in part 2, it's a means to an end. He has ultimate goals of, I'm doing this thing to protect my family, and my hope is that I don't lose my soul in the act of it. He loses his soul in the act of it, okay? But in part 3, it's redemption, and it's, can I make good and do something that my father never could do, and what his goal was, which is, can I make the Corleone family legitimate? It's something that Vito Corleone says that he never wanted this for Michael. He always wanted him to be something better than this. So part 3 is trying to fulfill that promise. So I understand why the whole Catholic Church plot is there. My problem with it is that Catholic Church plot is like a Rubik's Cube wrapped in an enigma with multiple moving parts. And for a nearly 3 hour long movie, it's hard to follow the Rubik's Cube and multiple moving parts when you're also trying to follow these other elements too, right? And they try to kind of connect them together and say, like, oh, yeah, well, because Michael wants the Immobiliare deal, he's got to, give up, some of his, he has to make his friends who have been in the mafia like whole. He's got to give up all the money from the casinos so that they're not part of it, right? Because he wants to keep it legitimate, which then leads to like, oh, the assassination attempt. So like, there's a lot of things that hinge on that Catholic plot, but it is very convoluted and very difficult to follow.
I think so much of it has to do with the attempted redemption of Michael, and it's easy to base that in a religious background, especially the history of allegedly Catholicism and the Vatican and organized crime. So I think it pays more attention, I think, to the redemption or attempted redemption of Michael, because as you stated, Brian, by the end of the second one, he's killed his brother, he's lost his wife and children. He sold his soul that he never wanted to lose in the first place. So it's like, where do you go at that point? It's like opening a scene crying. If you come in crying in a scene, like you're already at an 11, where do you go from there? So it's like, okay, what does Michael have to do to try to even redeem any quality of his existence before his inevitable death, which seems awfully close, even though he's only like 60 years old. But I guess it was a different time then.
It was a different time. But yeah, the Catholic Church plot is very convoluted, and it almost seems like they tried to do something a little bit different, but still stay kind of the same with part 2, where, instead of it being Hyman Roth and, Havana and Cuba and all that being the thing that makes the, Corleone family legitimate, it's now this convoluted thing with the Catholic Church. And one of the things that I saw in doing research for the movie is that the movie's supposed to basically show that, hey, all walks of life are corrupt, that there is no such thing as legitimate, that even something as quote unquote holy as the Catholic Church is filled with criminals too.
Yeah.
Which I think there's truth to that. I really do.
I think they could have gone a whole lot further with it. And just to go back to the beginning of the show, when I was like half paying attention, when I was a little kid, just in the room, I knew that it had to do with, as much as I did as a kid, like organized crime and religion. And I thought in my head that the end of the movie, the church was trying to kill Michael Corleone. Like, that's how I remembered it in my head, only paying half attention. And so it was actually funny for me when I did go back to rewatch this, when I was able to actually appreciate it, that I was like, oh, that's not the case whatsoever.
I mean, you're not, the church was trying to kill him to some extent, right? Because Don Lucchese, who sits on the board of Immobiliare, is a mafia don. Like, he's a Sicilian mobster and also politician, right? Like, that's the whole thing, is that he's another, mafia boss. But like, that's all supported by the church, and that Weasley, archbishop, whoever played the archbishop, literally must play a weasel in every film, because he looks like a Weasley character, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that you're not wrong. The Catholic Church is trying to kill them. But it's not necessarily like they don't want Michael's money, they don't want his help. It's the fact that Michael wants to go legitimate, but the fact of the matter is the church is dirty, right? The church is dirty, and they feel that if Michael's got control of Immobiliare, if he's got insight into the Vatican Bank, that it will reveal all of this dirty shit and shady shit that's going on, and kind of blow the thing wide open, which is why they kill the new pope. Here's the thing. A lot of what we're talking about is the reason why I'm saying this movie is jam-packed full of plot, and why I think a lot of people find it hard to follow.
Yeah, because outside of the religious stuff, it is kind of a, I don't want to say paint by numbers mobster kind of flick, but part of like Michael wanting to go legit is he meets with a bunch of other heads of crime syndicates and says, hey, I'm going to give you guys all the money that you earn from Vegas days, but that's it. Like, I'm out. I'm legit, except for Joe.
Joey
Joey
Zaza.
Zaza. Yeah, fuck you. And he goes, all right, I'm gonna walk out of the room, and then a helicopter is just gonna shoot you all immediately. It's like, well, that was fast, but like, okay,
Well,
now we
what
got
gave it away, John, that was going to happen was the fact he was holding an orange, which,
yeah,
let's be honest here, Francis was really like, you guys want the fucking symbolism? Fine, I'm going to throw oranges left and right in this movie. It's why my background for our video audience, it's orange. Okay?
Yeah, I'm in my mom's attic, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My background is boring, but
Yeah.
but no, if you actually go to the first two Godfather movies, are riddled with oranges whenever there's bad things happening or violence. So I guess Coppola is terrified of oranges, but yeah, and then it's like, oh no, he attacked us, so we got to attack him. Oh no, but we can't do it. We got to be smart about it, So then it becomes very much like a run-of-the-mill mobster film on top of like all the the other stuff going on with the church and all the stuff going on with his family, so yeah, there's a lot going on here. And weirdly, I think that this may have done better with a longer runtime in one sense, like the first two films.
How
But
long of a runtime does it need, John?
well,
It's already almost 3 hours.
It's
long.
2.5 hours. Like, it's a little, well, 2 hours 40 minutes, but like the other films are over 3 hours long. But the one thing I will say about this film, and why I have nothing against it, but I can't hold a candle to the first two, is I don't feel the runtime of the first two films. I don't feel the runtime of like the Lord of the Rings films or the Dark Knight. But this movie, even shorter than all those movies I just mentioned, God, I felt the runtime. I was just like, can this just wrap itself up at some point here?
I got to ask you a question. At what point in the movie did you really feel the runtime? Because I know in my head where the point is, but I'm curious where your point of the film is, where you were like, man, this is slow as fuck.
I thought when Michael got his stroke.
Oh my God, I was the same thing.
Yeah.
The minute he got a stroke and he's in the hospital, and we're like, okay, let's be honest here. The main character we've been following this whole entire time, we've given 90% of the screen time. Now we're just going to not focus on him for the next 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And instead focus on Vincent, Michael into bed, and yeah, he's going to kill Joey Zaza. Cool. Okay. Like, that's it. But yeah, it started to drag for me, and that was one of the only times where I looked at my phone like while I was watching. I'm like, oh, okay, let's see what's going on, because it's boring at this part. Like, when you make a movie around a central character like Michael Corleone, and then we don't focus on him, and you don't really have anyone else that's worth focusing on, those moments when they're not there is where it feels slow. Like in the first one, and I don't point to the second one, because the second one, for the most part, it's carried by Robert Duvall and it's carried by, Al Pacino. But in the first one, you had, Santino, who picked up a good chunk of the movie until his death, right?
Yeah.
Like Sonny, he picked up a good chunk of the movie, and he could deliver and interest in that. But in this third one, you really don't have that. Like, as much as I like Andy Garcia, he's not Al Pacino.
And yeah, he did well, but he did seem kind of just shoehorned into the movie. Like, I'm an illegitimate cousin. I'm here now because this movie needs me. You've never seen me before, but I've always been there. You just first time you see me, audience.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing against Andy Garcia as an actor. I've seen him in good things. I love him in the Ocean's 11 trilogy, that whole thing. But in this one, it's almost like someone said, okay, your Sonny's illegitimate son, act like him.
Mm-hmm.
But do it in a way that's not nearly as good.
Yeah.
like I need you to act like you're pissed off all the time that you're gonna start a fight, and that, oh yeah, by the way, you wanna bone your teenage you know
Cousin.
cousin.
Can we talk about the elephant in the room? Can we
Uh,
talk about
uh,
cousin fucking?
Okay. First of all, I want to pull up a comment, and this did come in. I hope the person's still here. Well, we are doing this live, but here's a comment from Trent Tripp. He says it's not even close to awful. Sofia Coppola can't act, but she's on screen for like 20 minutes of a 3-hour long movie. The rest is a masterpiece.
That is true. She is.
That is true.
They do limit her. I don't know if that was how she was written in the script in the first place, because Coppola is a dude, gonna have women in the movie too much, or if it was a matter of like, well, my daughter's no master thespian here, so we'll cut down her scenes either in the script, in production, or in post production. But yeah, she's not in there all that often.
No.
No.
So I just wanted to point that out, because I do agree. Like she can act, but apparently she can direct. So there's something there for that. But yes, John, let's talk about the big old elephant in the room, which is the incest subplot.
And the movie,
I never thought I would say that on this podcast, by the way. Let's talk about the big elephant in the room, the incest subplot. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, John, let's talk about that.
Well, not just like, maybe if that was a big deal in a movie, like kind of the whole theme of it, that's one thing, but it's such casual incest that it's almost like there's one scene in the movie when they're in Italy, and Michael says, you can't be with him. He's your cousin. She's like, basically, so he's like, he's your first cousin. And she goes, then I'll love him first.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Like,
oh my God. Well, one, I was just curious. I'm like, is this a legal thing? Apparently this is more common than you think. And it is, I guess, legal in certain states to marry your first cousin. I still think it's icky and fucked up. And I'm like, really playing Russian roulette with the genetic gene pool there, aren't you? But yeah, Mary gives no fucks at all about sleeping with her cousin at all. And even like, yeah, like, and I love the fact that in Italy, like Vincent and her are boning literally down the hallway from Michael. Like the scene where where she's playing music out the window, that's after. Okay. Yeah. That's after, by the way, Michael said, hey, stay away from my daughter. Please don't do this. This is wrong.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, he's like, no, because it could get her in trouble. It's like, no, it's because they share a gene pool. I mean,
yeah. It's because your kids could come out with 5 eyeballs. Stuff like that. I don't think the Corleone family wants to be that close.
We can't give this kid communion. He's got flippers.
He'll float in the holy water. See him, look, he flips around. He's like the hideous penguin man in the sewer. Yeah, I don't know what anyone was thinking. And let's just think also the logistics of this. Francis Ford Coppola is now directing his daughter to be part of an incest subplot in a film.
Yeah.
That's fucked up.
That's like some Vince McMahon shit.
That's that. I was wondering if you were going to go that far, because that is. Yeah. But wasn't there actually a plot where Stephanie McMahon actually said, I'm not doing that? Like Vince McMahon wanted to do a incest subplot, and she vetoed that. She's like, I'm not doing that, Dad.
Yeah, she was what we call shoot pregnant, so pregnant in real life. And so yeah, Vince wanted to put her on TV pregnant and said, we're going to write a storyline where I'm the father. And she went, for fuck's sake, no, Dad, we're not doing that. And so then he countered and went, okay, how about Shane, which is her brother?
Yes, because that makes it better.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is very much a Vince McMahon thing. Yeah, that subplot, I don't know why it's there. That is one of those things that you could remove it and you would be fine. Or let's be honest here. If it was important to have Vincent's character kind of have that love affair with Mary, maybe like don't make it someone in the family, like make it someone else, like one of, I don't know, Clemenza's kids or some shit like that, you know? We haven't seen Clemenza in a while because he's dead, but like maybe his kid gets involved. Like, I don't know. There are ways of making that work that aren't icky.
I would just cut the romance part out because like I don't think Michael would ever make anybody the head of the Corleone family like he does at the end of the movie that isn't like blood related to him. But maybe just don't literally have the first scene that we see Sofia Coppola in going up and giving fuck bedroom eyes to this guy who she's related to. Maybe just have them have a platonic relationship, you know?
You mean you've never flirted with someone by saying, "Hey, I remember you when I was 8 years old"?
Well, yeah.
You've never been like that? Remember me? I met you when I was 8.
Just Kevin Spacey.
Just Kevin Spacey. Oh, shit. Well, we've talked a little bit about the hit that happens, which is pretty cool. We've talked about Mary and Vincent's weirdo relationship. Do we want to talk a bit about the things that happen in Sicily? Because Sicily is where this movie kind of goes off the rails.
It in a lot of ways, it just kind of becomes like how I spent my summer vacation. Like, this is where my father lived. Here, Kate, let me show you all the great things about, Italy. And let's talk to some of the heads of the Italian mob families. Oh, now we're getting mob hits in Italy. Yeah, there's a lot that goes on. I think this film has a normal first act. It has the longest second act in the history of film and a fairly decent long third act, but nothing compared to the stretched out second act that we have.
Yeah, I mean, when they go to Italy, it starts as like, oh, yes, okay, you're gonna, formalize the Immobiliare deal and some shit like that. Okay, cool. That's awesome. But then we get thrown in with this other stuff like he meets, well, when the Pope dies, that's important to note. Okay, the Pope dies. And then now we've got a new Pope that has to be, crowned. And so now we're introduced to another character. And by the way, this is like in the third act.
Mm-hmm.
Introduced to another character, a cardinal, who's like the good cardinal who absolves Michael of his sins.
Even though he refuses to repent.
Yeah. I'm not a religious man at all, but I'm pretty sure like there has to be like a repenting thing. Like, I don't know, like for you Catholics out there, if you just say, hey, yeah, I did all this stuff, but I'm not sorry about it, does that count?
Well, see, I grew up with no religion, and my dad was
same here.
Yeah, my dad was a recovering Catholic. So I just said, like, jokingly one time, I think we were in the grocery store, so I was like, so I could just be a bad person my whole life and then just say I repent for it all, Dad, and go to heaven. He's like, well, no, in that religion, you have to actually mean it. You have to actually want forgiveness. You can't just fake it. And I was like, oh, that's where they got you. Okay.
Yeah, but I would go with like, can't you just mean it for like at the moment, like, and then not? Like,
yeah,
there are loopholes. Okay, that's all I'm saying. But yeah, like this scene which Michael has he confesses all of the horrible shit he's done. He actually says out loud that he killed his brother, which is never admitted at all. Like we, the audience, know he did it, but no other character verbally sees Michael like say it. Like it's never at all said. It's always like, oh, Fredo drowned. Okay, sure.
He wasn't much of a swimmer. Well, Fredo's not exactly a genius. I could see him trying to swim like to the bottom.
What are you telling me, John? He's smart. He just wants respect. Oh, poor Fredo. But yeah, like this the only time that Michael actually admits that, hey, yeah, I killed Fredo, and admits that he's killed these people, and he feels like not that he feels, but he looks like he is visibly like unleashing all of this sadness in him, and the Cardinal's just like, yep, you're a horrible person, and you're gonna suffer, and it's good you suffer. Bye bye. Like that's that's it.
Yeah.
But I guess that like confesses all of his sins. So I'm like, does that mean he's good now? Because after that, he doesn't really, he gives up being the Don. And I mean, he doesn't really have a hand in what happens in the opera.
Yeah, that's just that's rushed too. It's funny how
Yes.
this movie goes, like everything is drawn out for so long until we get to the third act, and it's like, okay, yeah, you're now the head of the Corleone family. Kiss the ring. Okay, goodbye. You're in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's because they like, I think it was more like Francis, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore.
I,
I got to get out of this thing.
I want to go home, drink some wine, and count how many cousins I have.
Yeah. On two hands.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we get to the opera scene, and this is where, you know, now Vincent is the Don, okay, and Michael is just a civilian. He's no longer doing this stuff, and he's just at a night to watch his son, you know, sing in an opera. Which, you want to talk about nepotism, John? How the hell do you think Anthony Corleone got into an opera that fast?
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, Brian. He's just the greatest voice of this or any other generation.
Well, I just thought about that. I'm like, you know, Michael is talking to him at the beginning of this movie and saying, oh, you can't be a musician. You got to have things that you have to have security and be a lawyer and all this fun stuff. Yeah. I'm like, dude, you're the fucking Godfather. I'm sure that if Anthony wanted to be in the music industry, you could make a call. Call Johnny Fontaine. I'm sure he'll set him up.
Yeah.
What is he going to say? No.
Came to your birthday party.
He came to your birthday party, dude.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that funny. I'm like, oh yeah, you immediately got into an opera all on your own, huh?
That seemed like that was kind of a drop storyline too. It's like, I don't want to be a singer. You got to be a lawyer. No, I want to be a singer. Well, fuck you. And then it's like, you should really let him be a singer. Oh, okay, for you, Kate. And now let's not mention this for another 2 hours and 15 minutes until we need a dramatic concluding scene in an opera house.
Yes. And the opera house is extremely dramatic because we have whatever shit is happening on stage also happen outside of stage, because this is where we get the classic Godfather kills everybody scene.
Yeah, it's Godfather Part 1 Redux kind of.
And 2.
Yeah.
And 2, don't remember, everyone in Godfather 2 gets killed too.
Right. But it feels, to me, it feels more like the baptism scene from
No, it's very much a baptism scene. But I got to say, I liked it. I like those parts because I'm like, yeah, this is a classic Godfather. We have to have the movie end with a, you know, the Corleones kill everyone in the most inventive ways. Like, that's the funny thing. In the first one, they were just like, I'm going to go dress up as a police officer and kill someone on the courthouse steps. Or I'm going to go and bust into someone's room and blow them away with a gun. In this one, it's what? I'm going to have a gun hidden in a can, in a cookie tin. Okay. Al Neri has a gun hidden in a cookie tin to go kill the Archbishop. Carlo manages to go to Don Lucchese's house and stab him with his own glasses.
Yeah. That's like some Silent Night, Deadly Night 2 shit.
Yes. Yeah. And then I forget who the third person is who ended up killing the Vatican banker, but he ends up like strangling his ass and hanging him off a bridge. And the best one of all, this is my favorite, is Don Altobello killed via cannoli.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna shoot other people, just shoot them. You don't need to poison his food. We don't need to get real cutesy here, guys.
Well, John, let's be honest here. Connie is the true villain of this movie. Like let's be honest here. No one wants to fuck with Connie. Like, Connie Corleone is the Viper, and I think I think one of those things where the true person who could run the Corleone family is Connie. Like, let's be honest here. Michael has too much good in him. Sonny is a hothead. Fredo is a moron. But Connie is really a mixture of all those parts, but the best parts, and probably could run it very powerfully because she kills Altobello in the best way possible, because he's an asshole, by the way. Like, he was the one betraying them the whole time, right? But she even bites a little bit of it herself, which I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
crazy. It's fucking crazy.
Now, what do you make of the? I know some people might be just turned off by which would be surprising because Godfather films are not exactly feel good picks, um, but the ending being so intensely sad and just l- devoid of hope. Like he loses his cherished daughter who only had good in her and only saw great things for, is killed in front of him. Cut to him dying alone as an old man, just collapsing out of a wheelchair onto his face with no one around because he's just destroyed his entire legacy and no one cares when he dies. It's like, wow, god damn.
I love the ending.
I do
Love it.
too, but I'm kind of
I
sick
love
of
the
it.
ending. It's incredibly sad. Now, here's my reason why I love the ending. I love the ending because if you look at the third part as a continuation of everything from part 1 to 2 to now 3, everything has been Michael's chipping away at his soul. Everything has been that, right? When he kills the McCluskey and who the hell is the other I'm blanking on the name of the rival mobster in the first one. The one who had the attack, attack on his father. Like when he kills him, that's when he first chips away at his soul. Like it's that point. That's the point where Michael is no longer our hero. He's something else.
Mhm.
And through all 3 movies, it's been his constant soul being tested to the point where there's not much left. And it's always been a thing where Michael has always come out on top, even as he's losing everything. Right. Um, and he's never lost anything that, you know, really affected him that much. Like, yes, he lost he lost Apollonia and he lost Kay and is obviously living a very lonely existence, but he is still surrounded by his family. But the minute Mary gets shot, it's a result of that first shot that Michael took years ago. That is why I love that ending, is because it's the repercussion. It was gonna come. Maybe it didn't come from you dying. Maybe it didn't come from you getting assassinated in part 2. Maybe it didn't come from Fredo screwing you over. It came at that point. That point in the entire life of Michael Corleone is the comeuppance, and it's a result of everything in those 3 movies. And when he bursts out crying, and you don't hear the scream, it is haunting. Like it is an absolutely haunting moment that still gets me tears too. Like I was watching, I'm like, oh yeah, this hits the feels, because you couple that with the music, and it's just incredibly sad. And then you cut to realizing like, oh yeah, he didn't die. He has to live with all of the shit that he has done and live with all of the loss. That's a really powerful ending. So while this movie is jam-packed and is a mess, it does kind of nail the ending, in my opinion.
I agree. I could just see how some people are like, well, I want to kill myself now after watching that.
I think if you look at it in the context of all 3 movies, it's fine. And that's why I say you know, part 2, if you stop there, kind of gives you the same sort of similar feeling, but he hasn't lost everything, right? Like he values his children above all things. He values a relationship with Kay above all things. Well, that's all gone now. Like, but at least in part 2, they're still alive. In
Yeah.
part three, one of them's dead,
Oh no,
and the other,
I'm divorced and my daughter's dead and my son's a liberal arts major.
yeah,
I've lost them all.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But no, the ending I think is haunting, and it always hits me in the feels. Um, but yeah, and I know that when they re-edited this thing as the quote unquote coda, they put like parts of that in the beginning, right? Like they moved that part to the beginning. It's supposed to be like he dies first, and then we go to like how that happened,
Yeah.
right?
What is this, Citizen Kane? Yeah.
Yeah, it is Citizen Kane. Oh shit! But yeah, I didn't hate it. I didn't hate the ending, and I didn't hate this movie. I mean, I really didn't. Now I got to ask you, why do you think this movie failed upon release? What do you think caused it to really suffer?
I think it's threefold, and I'll say probably the candiest way from the audience's point of view is um that everybody's so old now. Like I think there were a lot of people that didn't even dislike the fourth or fifth Indiana Jones movie because of all the reasons that you could in terms of the plot, the pacing, what have you. It's just that nobody ever wanted to see Indiana Jones old. And, the first two films were made within 2 years of each other. This one, 16 years later, everybody's old and also in older makeup as well to make them look even older than they are as human beings. So I think that a lot of people had a little trouble kind of dealing with that. I think also, speaking of time, waiting 16 years before making the third film, you know, um, now that's commonplace, as we talked about towards the beginning of the show, legacy sequels or sequel boots or soft sequel boots or what have you. It was kind of unheard of at that time. And it's been 16 years that, people kind of moved on from The Godfather. And let us not forget, people were initially appalled by the idea of there being a sequel because sequels were derided then for the first Godfather film until they saw it. And arguably, I'm one of them that's just in the boat that it's better than the original Godfather. But just the idea of it in the first place, of there being a sequel, was like, oh, how dare you? But then wait another 16 years and make another one. I think that caught everybody off guard. But I really do think it comes down to the end of the day, like it just can't, because nothing can compare to the first two films. And I don't think that there's anything they could have put on screen that was ever going to match the beloved nature of the first two films, capture that zeitgeist the first two films did. I think it was doomed to fail no matter what, just because it could never stand up to two of the greatest films of all time.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, I look at it as there this movie was doomed from the start. I really believe that. I think the movie was doomed from the start, that the word was out that, hey, Francis did this because of money, that you had issues with Winona Ryder dropping out, that you had, issues with the crew having issues with the way the movie was going. There's a lot that led up to this that spelled trouble. And I think at the end of the day, this is a movie that wasn't really necessary. And I think it shows that Francis didn't want to do this. Like, that's the thing. If you're not in the movie, if you're not into the movie, if you're not into wanting to make the thing that you need to make, and you're just like, I'm just doing this thing for cash. Which, don't get me wrong, we all do things for work that are mostly just for the cash. You don't love everything you do for work, but you still have to like care a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit, like, right, like you know when you work on something, right, John, that there's a difference between the thing that you're doing because you're like, yeah, I got to pay the bills, and the thing you're doing because you actually love the thing, but you're still getting paid for it, right?
Absolutely.
So like, there's a difference in approach, and I think that Francis's approach to this movie was more, I'm doing this because I just want to pay the fucking bills. But I think it shows in the movie. And I also think that this movie just has way too much plot for an audience in 1990. You know what I mean? Like, think about the movies that came out roughly around the same time. You had Goodfellas, another well, that came out 90 or 91. I think it was around the same
90.
time period.
Yeah.
90. So
same year.
yeah, around the same time. So that movie, vastly different from The Godfather. Godfather is Part 3 is a Greek tragedy. Okay, that's literally what I call it. I call it a Greek tragedy of a film about American mobsters. Okay, but Goodfellas is an Italian American movie made for 1990 audiences.
Yeah.
You know, it's got things like a fast pace to it. It's got things we're moving here and there, and we're seeing, you know, certain characters interact in different ways. So I mean, it's a different beast, and it feels different. And I think it matches more the speed of people in 1990 versus this operatic film that maybe felt more at home in the 70s than it did in the 90s. I think it was doomed from the start. But I don't think this is a terrible film. I don't think it's really that awful. John, do you think it's really that awful?
Not at all. No. I think you did hit the nail on the head right there. It's like, this didn't come from anyone's desire. It came from executives saying, well, we still have The Godfather and Pacino's still alive and all these people are still alive. You know, let's make another one. And then everybody involved with it went, well, it's either a paycheck or I need the money. Yeah, there was no inspiration there. There was no muse there. There was no,
Right.
you know, and that's what, and then wouldn't you know, you wake up and you read the trades and you see Home Alone beat you in the first weekend at the box office.
Was that the movie that came out around the same time?
Yeah, I think they came out the same.
Oh yeah, you can't fucking
trounced it.
You can't fucking beat Macaulay Culkin. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Suck it, Pacino.
Yeah. And then eventually Pacino becomes known for his Dunkachino thing, you know?
Say hello to his chocolate blend.
Yeah. Yeah. But good talk. Very good talk. Very good talk. Yeah. This was fun doing it live. Even though we had a couple people pop in, I think there's still a couple people there. What about you, say you folk who are in our live studio audience? What do you think? Did you hate Godfather Part 3?
Or if you
yes or no?
If you're listening to this after the fact too, like, do hit us up on our social medias and let us know if you think like,
yes,
oh no, you guys are wrong. That movie was god awful, or no, it was an absolute masterpiece. Like, we want to hear your takes on things. Yeah, engage with us. That's the whole
with us.
That's the whole hope and plan.
That's how this works.
Yeah.
Well, people are being shy. That's cool. We'll wrap it up here today.
No.
Well, with that said, John, where can they find you at on the internets?
Let's see, at the Book of Face, the Gram of Instant, over at the Tube of You, but in this case, me, at JDub's Video Nasties. So yeah, be on the lookout for So Many Questions, Men in Black. That is in the itty bitty baby stages right now, but that is next on the docket. So that, and I have extended list of best horror movies of the year, best foreign films, best documentaries, and I give you my Oscar picks, who I agree with the Academy and who I would have put in place of some of their picks. So those will be kind of quickies. So those will be out before the Men in Black video. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, that's what I have on the lineup going there.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm always curious to see, because you actually give a shit about the Oscars. I don't. Although this is the first year that the horror genre has been honored with some pretty
Amelia Perez. Oh no.
No, well, we're not talking about her. We're not talking about her. No, I meant the substance. That's what I meant, was the substance. But yeah, no, I'm always curious on your picks, because you actually give two shits about the Oscars, whereas I see it for what it actually is, which is a pageant-filled popularity contest that is not based on merit. But that's me. That's my point of view on it.
I like it as a sideshow.
I get it. I get it. And as long as you get entertainment from it, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
as for me, do me a favor. If you've loved this podcast, if you've loved this episode, share it with your friends. Share it with your friends. Okay, send them a link to this episode. If you're watching us here on YouTube, hey, go ahead, send them the link to watching it. And if you want to follow the podcast, do me a favor. Go to cinemapsychoshow.com/follow. You can follow us on your favorite podcast app of choice. We got little buttons all there that you just click and boom, you can automatically follow us. And of course, if you're watching us here on YouTube, hey, thank you for doing that. Do me a favor, hit that thumb, hit the thumb. Yeah, the thumb. Hit a thumbs up, follow the podcast, follow the channel, Jesus Christ, as well as hit the bell for notifications. And with that said, we will see you next time.
Join us next week for our review of Godfather 4, The Ghost of Michael Corleone Scared Sheetless.